Hello, and welcome to Phase 2 Learning Session number 1 in regards to leverage, the social, emotional, and equity connection. I'm Dr. Angela Byrd-Wright, Math Curriculum Leader and Division Equity Leader, and I'm joined by...
Hey, I'm Heather Peterson, Director of Climate and Culture. Super excited to be here collaborating with Dr. Byrd-Wright.
Excellent. And I love working with you as well, Heather. So we're in for a treat today as we share about that social, emotional, and equity connection. So now, as we just stated at the top, we are now moving into phase 1 in regards to cultural competence. You remember from phase 1 was onboarding and pre-competence. So there we were learning about those common understandings as well as language as we were defining it in regards to our own self-awareness and critical consciousness. We're going to take those same skills and understandings and philosophies that we've really developed and honed in on from phase 1 and bring that now on into phase 2. You remember phase 1 was also our longest phase. This one will be a little bit shorter, but you're going to take those concepts from phase 1 and apply them as we now move into defining what we mean when we talk about cultural competence and really exemplifying that moving forward into a very clear and explicit way. So really, we're going to talk about that explicit connection between social emotional learning, or SEL, and equity. And we're going to be defining cultural competence and culturally proficient spaces in this space as we move into phase 2. And the impact of this work is, again, to translate and to transform our understandings from phase 1 by developing that common language and understanding and transcend really into cultural competence and its leverage points. And our understanding will then form and inform the basis and our shared commitment to the intentional connections. And I know you're going to see those very clearly as Heather and I move forward between the social emotional learning and equity. So as always, we give you a description of our topics for our discussions for today. And so our description, we will be able to clearly articulate and form connections between transformational social emotional learning and equity. So our actions today, we're going to engage, and you'll have the opportunity if you're on your own, or if you are with a thinking partner or a small group, if you happen to have missed our session, our live session that we did, you'll have an opportunity to engage in a series of reflection, questions, and activities on your own, really to extend the work and understanding from phase 1 to the 5 Castle core competencies. And then Heather is really going to explain and break that down in that relationship to the equity elaborations as well, with the frames of self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, relationship skills, and responsible decision-making. As always, you have a reflection guide. If you were to select the link that's provided here, that's going to take you over to your reflection guide. And this will be a great time and opportunity for you to click that. It'll make a forced copy for you. And then you'll be able to reflect and connect at certain points, as we've done in the past throughout our time together. So I'll give you a moment just to make that forced copy. All right, let's get ready to rock and roll. So here, as we talk about our drive, again, our driver behind our work is to understand that intertwining or that interconnectivity between social emotional learning and equity, and the impact on our environment, our communities, our curriculum, our instructional methodology, and really how that validates and reflects the diversity, identities, and experiences of all of our students. We have to understand that both are systemic with an emphasis on equitable learning environments. And that speaks to our equity model as we talk about our core business of teaching and learning, what it means when we talk about culturally responsive teaching, leadership, responsive curriculum within that safe and nurturing environment to maximize the learning of all of our students, every child, every day, whatever it takes. As always, we talk about our shared commitment to brave space, and you can probably memorize this by now that we've been doing this for a while together. And so our commitment to brave space is as such, really understanding that we are an intentional community. We learn through our interaction, our own self-reflection and awareness, and we have a space that we can really share and unpack and work together and have that comfortable place to be uncomfortable. And then in order for us to create such a space, we can do our best with listening with intention, understanding that we can affirm one another, and really to think and hone in on having some honest and thoughtful reflections and discussions with each other, working through pressing forward and staying engaged in the process. And that all comes from, again, all that work that we did with phase one of being self-aware, applying that self-reflection, and then having the ability to speak and honor your truth. And as always, what you learn here leaves here. We want you to take what you learned today and apply each and every day, not just leave it here. But of course, what you think here, what you say here always stays here. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Heather Peterson, who's going to kick us off with transformational social emotional learning. Heather?
Thank you, ABW. Super excited, as I mentioned, to really push forth in this journey that we've been on. We're in the middle of year 4 of intentional work around social emotional learning. Love that we are being so intentional in the intersection of this work and how social emotional learning truly is a lever for equity. This past summer, and working collaboratively with Dr. Byrd-Wright, we came up with some visuals around what this work really looks like. And so if people are able to grasp, when we think about social emotional learning from a visual standpoint, what does that really mean? So when you look up here at this visual, you'll see social emotional learning is at the heart of what we do, and it impacts that notion of engagement and belonging for both adults and students and our families, how it creates the conditions for a positive climate and culture, certainly more than ever with the space that we've been in over the past couple of years, our mental health and well-being. And again, when we go from a standpoint of social emotional learning being at the heart of what we do, then it strengthens our lens of equity. And again, we're not doing equity, just like SEL is not a program, equity is not a program, but social emotional learning is a tool, it is a process, it is a support, if you will, to strengthen that lens. So when we unpack, what do we mean by this definition of transformative SEL? It's a process, again, not a program, not an initiative, where both adults and young people are building those relationships that are respectful and long-lasting. And they facilitate co-learning to critically examine root causes of inequity and to develop collaborative solutions that lead to personal, community, and societal well-being. So as you soak that definition in, and again, didn't have this definition when we were creating this visual, but just want to give you a moment to pause and think about what's the alignment that you notice between this definition, this 2019 definition of transformative SEL, and the Hampton City Schools visual model of transformational social emotional learning. So take a moment and just reflect on that. All right, so as we take a look at the next piece of this, so we unpack that definition, that process piece, but what I am super excited to be sharing with you today are what are called the focal constructs for transformative SEL. In 2019, the folks at Castle, again, they've been doing this work really in depth since 2001, so over 20 years of research. But in 2019, given where we were socially, politically, racially, and on into 2020, really Castle, the Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning, wanted to say, what really becomes the lever for equity? What research do we have when we think about those 5 core competencies? What can we do, or how do we use this again to make that true leverage point? So I want to take a look at these connections. When we think about self-awareness, which typically we think about how aware am I of my emotions, how my emotions impact others. When we think about this being a key to equity, it's all about identity. So when we think about adults who are supporting young people, what is their identity? Where do they see themselves, and how do they see themselves? And how does that impact how they're helping to shape the identities of the young people that we're supporting? And when we think about self-management, we've been lifting that up as the ability to understand and manage our emotions and put strategies in place to recognize what our strengths are and how we leverage those. So when we're extending that and looking at that as a key to equity, it's about that agency piece. How are we helping to empower or give capacity to students so that their voice becomes a tool for change and through purposeful action? So when students understand their strengths, when they're able to bring their true identity, then they are able to step in a space where they can self-advocate. And again, their voice becomes a piece of agency. The third piece, we've talked about social awareness, perspective taking, understanding and appreciating differences, that empathy component. Well, what this key equity focal construct talks about is how we create that belonging. That if we're creating through the growth of social awareness, an environment of acceptance, respect, and inclusion, then that helps us to use our identity and agency and create that true sense of belonging. And when we're lifting up those relationship skills, we often refer to that as the starting line for all of our work in education. What it allows for is collaborative problem solving, that I can forge relationships with those that may see things different than I, but it builds a stronger problem solving process. And the fifth piece, taking that responsible decision making and helping young people to be more curious about their thoughts, their ideas, and using those four others: identity, agency, belonging, and collaborative problem solving, to be curious about themselves and the world around them, thinking about how they can take things like project-based learning and performance assessments and pour themselves their real lived experiences and be more curious. So excited to see how we can use this from a curriculum and instruction standpoint and equip our adults who support young people to use these equity elaborations and these focal constructs to deepen the development of social emotional learning for our students. So these are the emerging insights that CASEL came up with when we really talk about that lever, if you will, for equity and excellence. Today, we're going to talk about key insight 1 and 2. So starting with 1, and that's something that Dr. Byrd-Wright and I have been so intentional about, is how we marry or position and communicate about SEL as a lever for equity. So let's take a little bit of a deeper look at that. So again, these are not roads, parallel highways, if you will. Social emotional learning isn't a sole highway that never intersects with equity and vice versa. And it is important, again, that we communicate how these intentionally intersect and create structures and processes for them to indeed intersect. So key insight number 1, if we unpack it a little bit more, is about how do we establish standards, commitments, and values that communicate the priority around the alignment of equity and SEL, that they're not two separate pots, but again, as they intersect, what are the priorities for this work? And creating structures, I would say processes and partnerships to synergistically, and I love that word, to again, not say, if we do this, then we get to check this off. And if we do this, then we check this off. But again, how that intersection is really coming together to coordinate the SEL and equity efforts. So again, aligning this work, we have that beautiful equity visual and at the center, that our core business of teaching and learning, and we can see where social emotional learning impacts that work, as well as equity impacting the work of social emotional learning. And it needs to be intentional, explicit, and overt. So when we think about things that we need to commit to, again, key insight 1 is how are we going to be intentional about this? That again, as we're doing this implementation, and again, we're in year 4 of this SEL work, and I would argue almost year 2 of this intentional intersection, it's a focus on affirming the strengths, the values, the cultures, and lived experiences of students from diverse backgrounds, and not making assumptions about what those experiences are. That social emotional learning is a strategy. For us, it is a tier 1 strategy. It is good for all adults and all students in our division. It is not a computer program. It is not reserved for just some. It is something that is available to all, and that it is a way for us to uplift student voice and promote agency and civic engagement, having kids be more curious about their community and their environment, and using their voice to advocate for what they see is important to them. And how, first and foremost, we support adults to strengthen their own practices that promote equity. And that as a division, we have to engage our families, students, and communities as authentic partners in this work. They need to understand those priorities. They need to understand their role in supporting social emotional learning, and certainly focus on their own development as well. So this is a great time. I just kind of poured a lot out right there for you to take a moment. This jot and talk is in your reflection sheet. So this is a great time for you to pause the video. If you are with somebody, take a moment to reflect and then turn and talk, or certainly capture it there in your reflection guide. How do we elevate? How do we lift up a strength-based and culturally responsive understanding of SEL? And that has to be aligned and across our programs, our policies, our practices, our initiatives. When we think about the framework for the way we do business, our professional learning on down to our assessments. So again, take a moment to jot this down. If you're with someone, certainly share, but take a moment to reflect on how can we elevate this work and have it aligned across programs, practices, policies, initiatives, our professional learning on down to our assessments. All right, great. Let's take a look at key insight number 2, which is prioritizing adult learning and critical reflection about our own social, emotional, and cultural competencies. As I mentioned, Castle has over 20 years of research, and a lot of early adopters of this work said if they had to do it all over again, they would have started with adults. They wouldn't have even dreamed about bringing students into it until adults had a true, clear understanding and command of their own social, emotional skills. So when we think about this from a lever of equity standpoint, let's take a deeper look at this. So some of the actions that support this work, again, are getting staff to make those intentional reflections. Where are we and what are my own social emotional competencies? What are my strengths? What might be my triggers? What are my beliefs? And most importantly, what might be some biases, both explicit and implicit biases? How do we come together as a staff to have the right conversations and examining inequities and co-designing strategies to promote equity across the division? This can't be a prescription methodology. It can't be one person's voice. It's something that has to be something that is designed collaboratively. And we have to build the capacity for engaging in practices that promote culturally responsive SEL and equitable learning environments. And I use that word conversation. This isn't something you read. This isn't something you PD or workshop about, and it's magically something that gets applied. It takes creating spaces like Dr. Byrd-Wright had mentioned when we first started, where we're going to have difficult conversations, where we're going to have to be active listeners, and where we're going to have to push past some boundaries. So again, that takes us as adults reflecting on our own social, emotional, and cultural competencies. So let's take a little bit of a deeper dive. And I just want to quickly share some of the equity elaborations with you. These are also available in your reflection guide, so you'll be able to refer back to them. There's a link right there that takes you to those. And it's got it in a nice chart there format for you. So the chart that you have is what you see here. And we're going to just quickly dig into the 5 of them just to give you food for thought before you do your final reflection on this component. So if we look at that next slide on self-awareness, and we think about, again, what does self-awareness mean? And on the left side, these are things we've been talking about for the past 4 years. But when we think about it from an equity elaboration, again, the importance of examining different social identities, having and understanding meanings of social identities, and again, grounding in and affirming of different cultural heritages. And how do we not only celebrate it just at certain times, but it's a safe space in our classrooms to be able to talk about that and make direct connections. And when we take a look again at self-management, again, managing those emotions, being able to set and achieve those goals. But when we elaborate on this from an equity standpoint, it's thinking about coping with acculturative stress. And what that means is in our classrooms and schools, we have cultures that collide, if you will. And sometimes feeling like I'm not sure what my identity is, or I'm forced into a different identity because of the culture that I'm walking into, it creates stress. And so from a self-management standpoint, being able to recognize that and also being able to have those strategies, and that there is discrimination and prejudice that exists. And so from a self-management lens, how do we not only cope, and cope doesn't mean an acceptance of, but recognize we're in a space where those things can exist, and how do we address those and manage those? And that third piece of social awareness, again, that perspective taking, as we mentioned, the respect for diversity. But when we really unpack this, it's discerning the importance that there is both a situational sense of diversity and a climate of diversity. And it's important for us to understand those differences and what impact that they have when we think about our social emotional skills and truly creating spaces of equity and recognizing the cultural demands and the opportunities. It's one thing to say that we create those opportunities, but do those outcomes and supports and resources come along with them? And when we talk about that collective efficacy, we can't just have posters on walls that say what we believe. It's do our actions speak to what our beliefs are? And when we look at relationship skills, again, how am I demonstrating cultural competence? And that I might not be at the level I need yet, but if I'm truly grounded in building those relationships, then I need to get better at my cultural fluency. I need to grow and I need to have a willingness to learn more. And that fourth piece of responsible decision making, again, how am I considering the saliency of diversity and the climate that exists within the building, in the community, in the greater national scheme and international scheme? How am I assessing the impact of my biases in the classroom and what I believe? How might that be impacting the experience I'm creating for students and their learning? Pursuing how can I make a mutually beneficial environment and how can it be more inclusive, and reflecting on the broader ethical consequences of my decisions, both intragroup, intergroup, and then also thinking about the relations within my school community and community at large. Whew. So I just shared a lot on those elaborations. And again, you have this in your reflection document, but this is going to be another space for us to have some reflection. So I would love for you to ponder for a moment, how do the equity elaborations impact your role and the work that you support, right? Of those 5 competencies, I often ask you, what's an area of strength for you? So if you look now through the lens of an equity elaboration, what are one of the things that you feel you have pretty good command over? And is there a competency that you need more growth in? And the ironic thing could be something that you see as a space of strength. Now that you see that equity elaboration, you see you still have work to do. So would love for you to pause the video and take a moment, again, thinking about your role. What's your area of strength when it comes to those equity elaborations, and what's something you're committed to growing, and how might you think about doing that?
Well, thank you so much, Heather. As always, you give us so much to think about and to really contemplate in regard to our own personal work, and then how to establish that and frame it such that it really responds to our role and how we can continue to evolve and apply that work, not just to ourselves, but also to those that we team with, those in our larger group or circle or departments, if you will. And then that taking that information and how it's going to make an impact on our climate, either our culture, when you talked about situational or contextual, or just operationally as we're working together. And I think you framed and set that up so nicely as we now really rock and roll into our 4 dimensions of our equity lens, because that's that tie that binds social emotional learning and equity, because through both of those frameworks, you can see it's very explicitly stated and I think activated upon from the work that you are doing for our division as well as mine. Also thinking about access, opportunity, supports, and outcomes. We want all of our students to have access to the very best. That's what our core values speak to. We talk about the opportunities that students have. Our students should have every opportunity possible to live, to grow, to work in a safe and nurturing environment, right? And then having the supports in place, be it having the toolbox, the toolkit, the competencies, integrating that with those equity elaborations so that we can have or witness and see the fruits of our labor through the outcomes that we produce. And so it's very clear, and I love that word too, about just the synergy that both social emotional learning has as it leverages the work of equity into this operational frame that we've decided here in our school division that we'll push forward with, and that is through access, opportunity, supports, and outcomes. And you can apply that to any area in our school division. We want our students to have access. We want to provide them with multiple opportunities to be successful, and adults for that matter, we want to make sure that all of our adults and students alike are supported so that we can witness and see those outcomes of which we're pouring or really sowing the seed into to see those things grow. So I think that's a great way to segue into just understanding our philosophies, understandings, and commitments that we have here in Hampton City Schools. And again, both social emotional learning and equity in education promote conditions to enable all children, and I should have a little caret symbol, and adults to reach their full potential. While we unpack and manage our emotions, achieve our goals, we make responsible decisions, and we really work to get along. So we not only student, but we adult as well, right? And really thinking about ways that regardless of background, gender, identity, race, ethnicity, language, income, background, languages spoken at home, which is really the definition of education equity, our students and adults have the ability to succeed, not just the potential energy, but the kinetic energy to put it into place here in our school division and beyond. And so at the top of the presentation, you're going to see our philosophy, understandings, and commitments. And so if you to click that purple link, it's going to take you to this document where it's unpacked about the stance or the philosophy and understanding and our commitments here in our school division in regards to our division level leadership, school-based leadership, and instructional staff. And starting back again with the model. Heather spoke to the model for social emotional learning, and you can see that's through that lens of equity, through maximizing every child's learning in that safe and nurturing environment, through that core business of teaching and learning. And through this, our philosophy has been, I like to say, upgraded a little bit, like Beyonce and Jay-Z, upgraded a little bit when we talk about the ways that we are committed to ensuring equitable access, opportunities, supports, and outcomes. So if you were to click that link there, you would see that our philosophy of Hampton City Schools really has been more explicit in this work of ensuring that not only in collaboration with our community, that we're going to ensure academic excellence for every child, every day, whatever it takes, but it's unpacked to an explicit degree as about our beliefs and our core values and how we plan to accomplish this and what are the key steps and commitments in so doing. And so if you were to have the opportunity, I certainly won't read it for you, but you certainly can go through and see some of those bullet points. But one of the things that I like about our philosophy of Hampton City Schools is that we do this by remaining steadfast, not, here and there and every other Tuesday, but steadfast in our dedication to the work of maximizing every child's learning. And so that's why it's at the core of not only our equity model, but when you think of the heart of the matter of social emotional learning, if we can get to the head and the heart of both our students and adults, we really can flourish here as a school division. And we do that in a safe and nurturing environment. I frequently say, I know I've heard HP say it, you can't learn if it's not safe and nurturing, y'all. You just can't do it. It's hard to do. But when we're led and sustained by that, it's also framed or enveloped by exceptional and culturally competent staff. And Heather really unpacked that piece about the self-management and responsible decision-making, about understanding and unpacking one's own culture, and that contextual as well as conceptual framework through those equity elaborations earlier. And then eliminating disproportionality and achievement gaps in student performance through a comprehensive support system of care. Again, having that safe and nurturing environment, but also ensuring that when we say our core values are teaching and learning, we want to do this through a guaranteed and viable curriculum. And it's guaranteed when you use it, and it's viable when you use it and really make it work for you and your students, or those of which you're working with to support. And then establishing high quality instructional learning opportunities. Those are embedded within that guaranteed and viable curriculum, providing opportunities for students to express themselves, taking into account the many modes. That's really talking about not only divergence of thinking and differences of opinion, but also differentiation as well. And then providing students with those opportunities and resources to develop their positive and realistic concepts of themselves and others through multiple avenues, not just through the academic pieces, but also through those co-curricular, extracurricular activities, and ensuring the equity of opportunity and access through our programs, program evaluation, professional development, and our services, that really making sure not only that, but we align our fiscal resources effectively and efficiently. And that's the unpacking of the philosophy. But not only that, we talk about here in our commitments about what it means when we've unpacked educational equity. equity or education equity and what that means and how it's defined, and our promise to our mission. And that is the portrait of a Hampton graduate. So understanding that our word and our walk are the systems and the structures that we put in place, the self-reflection, the self-awareness that we engage in on a regular basis to ensure that we create those safe and nurturing environments that can maximize the learning of our students. Not only that, what are we committed to? And that's examining our policies, adopting policies and system approaches that really ensure equitable school community inclusive of all students and all of our staff. Several policies have been updated most recently here in our school division to ensure that our students and staff have what we call non-discriminatory practices, ensuring that we are providing a safe space and place for teaching, for learning, and just for living and thriving. It's not just about the survival, but really thriving in our school division and promoting a culture of those high expectations here for all of our students and staff. And then within this frame, you also see, Heather couldn't wait for me to get down to D. So I'm already down there now. We're there. And that is the social emotional learning as a lever for equity. We are explicit and clear and really saying here as a division, they're not pursued as separate bodies of work. Heather talked about, it's not a program, it's not an initiative, it's not something we're doing over here. I tend to say it's not a separate bucket. So we both have our own kind of colloquialisms when we talk about this, but it's not a bucket over here and a social emotional learning here and a lever over there. We're working this work together. So we have to work the work, if you will. And then we will have an equity plan each and every year, an annual plan that will be reviewed and shared with our school board and our stakeholders and our division leadership team, as well as our community at large. And then when we talk about our key terms, I think it's important to understand that when we're speaking language, that we're all understanding and interpreting things in the same way. And so we've provided some key terms here, but each and every commitment and understanding is really undergirded by legislation and our policy basis, because we want to make sure that our work, and again, our walk is very clear, but it's grounded in the legislation as well as our policies that again speak to the systems and structures that we have and will continue to put in place to ensure equitable access, opportunities, supports, and outcomes for all of our students and families and adults in which we serve. So it's very important to take an opportunity to look through that particular document to familiarize yourself with this. And so now the moment you've been waiting for, we've been talking about how phase one was long, 4.5 months long, and that was on purpose. Because here's the key that we needed to get to. When we talk about cultural competency, what's the key word you see there in orange? Heather, I think I used your color for this one. And that's having an awareness. That's why we stayed there so long. Having that awareness and reflection of your own cultural identities and views about difference. Understanding that there are differences, but the ability to take that awareness and apply it to learn and to build upon varying cultural and community norms. So that's that contextual piece, that conceptual piece that Heather just talked about. And we wonder to see where's the connection. There's the connection right there. You got to have an awareness of self. And then how those norms impact our students and their families, because our students are just a representation of their families. They're an extension, right? Just like when my boys go to school, they're an extension of their father and I, right? And so they bring their community norms and understandings and their culture into the classroom. And so it's our ability, or the onus is on us as the adults, as those that we serve, that we work with teacher groups, with administrators, or whomever we serve and work with, to have that ability to unpack and to understand not only our within group differences that make us all unique, but also celebrating the between group variation that really make us not only just our country, but as a division, a tapestry really of what we can become. And so really we define this, we talked about, our work with not only social emotional learning and equity that's really grounded in policy and legislation, but it's also grounded in our strategic plan explicitly. And if you want to know, page 9, we even gave you the citation, page 9. And we define it as this in Hampton, and that is in our schools, it also encompasses an understanding and an appreciation of diversity and making conscious efforts. So again, going back to that word conscious effort, critical consciousness, we talked about that. So those keywords are coming right back into play here to avoid judgment based on biases, stereotypes, or a lack of accurate information, meaning that we're going to unpack and really study to learn, to really emphasize our understanding of diversity, and then making a conscious, so it's not an unconscious effort or whenever we feel like it, but really making that conscious effort to really make sure that we have understanding. So think back to our commitments to brave space. It's the same thing. Having an affirmation of others, understanding, speaking our own truth, understanding that we can affirm one another, though we may have to disagree, and that's fine, but creating that space such that our awareness and our own cultural identity and views are really capitalized on, so that we can move forward and advance the work of social emotional learning, to advance the work of equity when our spaces of which we have impact. And so now you have the opportunity to reflect and connect. Now, if you're by yourself, you may have to jigsaw by yourself. If you're with a partner or two or in a small group, you have the opportunity to engage in this particular jigsaw. And what you're going to do is to take a moment. You will have a number, and if you're by yourself, you can read the entire article and then decide for yourself, what are some ahas that kind of resonated to the fore for you with each given statement with your thinking partner or group. And then you'll have the opportunity to kind of just turn and talk if you're in a small group, or to do your reflections here. So you have these that are provided for you in the jigsaw. The article is also linked in your reflection guide, but you have a section number. And so it's an easy read, but opportunity to engage in understanding what are some things that kind of just resonated with you. So give you a few moments. Here's the article. Social emotional learning won't happen without a culturally relevant start. Here in our division, we're using the term culturally responsive, which also aligns with our Ed Equity VA framework, the Compass tool, as well as our framework and model here that we have here in Hampton Schools. But those words are relatively interchangeable here. However, give you the opportunity to read through the article. You'll take each section, and then you'll come to just write down some of your reflections or ahas that you saw there in the article that you read. So take a moment, select a section number, and then select or begin to jot down your ahas. Be a good time to pause the video. All right, team, welcome back. Thank you so much. And I hope you had an opportunity to really reflect on the article that was presented to you. And so now we're going to move into key insight number 3, and that's elevating students' cultural assets, voice, and agency. And we're going to touch on that a little bit. And so when you think about key insight number 3 about elevating students' cultural assets and agency, again, that goes back to speaking to our model and our core values here as a division. Because we say every child, every day, whatever it takes. And students, the best thing that they have within themselves is their voice. And we have to hear them and uplift that, enhance it, and then embed those thinkings, those understandings into our practices. And so as we think about that, one of the areas of insight are our social teaching practices, and thinking through each of these areas that you can see here: student-centered discipline, our teacher language, responsibility and choice, warmth and support. And then how does it manifest itself? Through disciplinary strategies are developmentally appropriate, teacher talk, engaging with students, encouraging students, lifting them, encouraging them. Students are provided opportunities to make responsible decisions. I could have sworn that Heather just talked about responsible decision-making and creating a culture and a classroom where the students know that the teacher cares. I think that goes back to self-awareness. I think that goes back to self-management skills as well, not only for us as adults, but with our students, to understand that our classroom is our culture and we create that space for learning. I hope I got that right, Heather, as I'm thinking about those connections. Am I on point with that?
I was getting ready to say amen.
All right, well, good. I'm glad that I got an amen and a hallelujah in the corner. Nice, nice. All right, so reflecting and connecting. So you've got the glow and grow for a moment. We want you to think about and discuss, maybe with your thinking partner or on your own, can you identify a glow or grow for your area of oversight? So as you may be engaging in instructional walks or attending CLTs, what are some things that you're hearing amongst those that you're working with, or if you're working with school learning plan teams and helping them in some way? Think about some things that you're seeing or having some discussions about that are glows, and then some areas that can be of growth. You'll find this information on your reflection guide, so you'll see that here. So in the social teaching practices area, you'll provide your glow and your grow here. So let's take a moment just to pause, and then we'll come back together to talk about instructional teaching practices. All right, folks, welcome back. We're going to go right into instructional teaching practices, and the same holds true here. So cooperative learning, and that's going along again with the terminology that we've talked about in some of our UBD modules as well, when we talked about that safe space for cooperative learning instead of collaborative learning. And Heather has spoken to that on several occasions as well. See, I'm listening, Heather. Classroom discussions, having self-assessment and self-reflection. I think self-assessment is a very powerful tool for students. But not only that, again, going back to phase one, that self-awareness, self-reflection, because that allows you, as you can see here, to actively think about your own work and your own processes, because that helps you to get better. And then having balanced instructional approach, we will be speaking to this and have just recently in regards to our curriculum audit, and then our curriculum reframing process as well. And then academic press and expectations. Here we can also associate that with productive struggle. And then building our competence, having and developing students' social emotional skills through the typical instructional cycle. So being intentional in our language, intentional with our actions, the mannerisms that we provide in our classrooms, the things, and again, going back to creating a brave and safe space for both teaching and learning. So you can see that overlap there, that connectivity between social emotional learning and equity. And so now, again, same as you did with the social teaching practices, take a moment now just to discuss either with your thinking partner small group or just to reflect on your own about what you can identify as a glow and a grow for your area of oversight. This will be a good time again to pause the video, and then we'll come right back together. All right, I'm going to turn it back over to Heather to talk about SEL and CIA walks. Heather?
Thank you. So again, if we're going to be intentional about the alignment processes, the intersection of our work, early this year, I started doing some quick cell walks, the 6 easy ways, if you will, to infuse cell. And I would love to partner as you are doing your instructional walks to have your keen insight. So again, we can take a look at how are we seeing this done? Are we seeing some ways that we need to leverage cell for equitable practices, and just your insight on instruction? So if you're interested in doing that, I know that we've linked what the document or what the walkthrough actually looks like, but just reach out to me and let's share calendars and see if we can collaborate in this work.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Heather. And so now as we conclude this particular section here, so again, our work in this phase is to really translate and transform from phase one to phase two by applying those the common language and understandings and leverage that into cultural competence, unpacking what that looks like from the lens of social emotional learning and those equity elaborations, because that's going to help us to inform the basis of our shared commitments and connections between the two. And again, this phase is divided into 2 learning experiences. And so we'll be stepping into defining and to own cultural competence at our next time together. So prior to our next session, it's important to read Chapter 9, Culturally Responsive Teaching and the Brain, and complete your self-paced work. So you do have your book here. Look at mine, is all tabbed up. So you have your book, but you also have it on the Gale libraries as well if you want to use that electronically. I've got to highlight and tab it up. So some folks can do it either way. But what we'd like you to do is to make sure that you do your phase 2 learning session 1 self-paced work. And if you need to check in with me in regards to any previous post-work exercises, then feel free to reach out. We'll be very happy to help you at any time. As always, Heather, I just want to thank you for your time and doing this in tandem. I'm so excited about our continual work together and what that will bring in regard to our curriculum instruction and assessment team. Heather, did you have any last thoughts that you wanted to share before we sign off today?
Just glad that we get to be the personified intersection of this work. And again, love the collaboration and certainly know that both of us are a resource. And again, thank you so much for inviting me to do this with you, ABW.
Thank you, Heather. It's always an honor and privilege to be with you. Thanks so much, everyone, and we'll be seeing you soon. Take care. Bye-bye.